Alright, so today we are back again for another 15 minutes of reading. I'm going to continue reading Substack today. And the first thing that appears on my Substack will be what I read and something that I will spend some time to reflect on later. So, okay. I like this. Rewiring neuroplasticity, rewiring your brain to do hard things. Why your brain fights change and how to win the battle through neuroplasticity. New year, new me. How many times have you heard that phrase? Hell, some of you are probably guilty of saying it yourselves. I know I am. January 1st, the day millions of people wake up with this weird optimistic delusion that somehow the calendar flipping over magically transformed them into a different person. This year, I'm gonna hit the gym. This year, I'm gonna start that business. This year, I'm gonna quit my shitty habits and become the person I've always wanted to be. And then February hits, maybe March if they're really disciplined, and they're right back where they started. Same person, same patterns, same life. The gym membership goes unused. The business idea stays an idea. The habits come crawling back. Why? Because they fundamentally misunderstand how change actually works. They think change is about motivation or about willpower. They think just wanting it bad enough will work. It's not. It never will. Change is about neuroplasticity. It's about literally rewiring the physical structure of your brain so that the new behavior becomes as automatic as the old one. And nobody talks about this. Nobody explains the actual mechanism. So people keep failing, keep blaming themselves for not having enough discipline, and keep repeating that same cycle every January. Fuck that. It's 6:47 right now. I'm sitting at my desk with a cup of black coffee sweetened with raw honey because refined sugar is for people who hate their brain cells. Dark ambient music playing through my speakers. Some artist I can't even pronounce the name of just sounds like the inside of a cathedral at 3 a.m. Rain hitting my window. Not that romantic movie rain. Sounds more like that constant ticking of a clock. My whiteboard next to me is covered in marker scribbles from last night. Diagrams of neural pathways, notes on habit learning, arrows pointing everywhere like I'm planning a heist. I've been thinking a lot about neuroplasticity lately, about how your brain is basically just meat that learns to think, and how that meat can be reshaped if you understand that mechanic. And if you want to download everything I've learned into your brain right now, because this shit is genuinely life-changing, if you actually understand it. This isn't a step-by-step guide. I'm not going to give you 5 easy tricks to rewire your brain. If that's what you're looking for, then you are in the wrong place. This is a deep dive into what's actually happening in your skull when you try to change, why most people fail, and why you need to know to not be one of them. Let's get into it. What neuroplasticity actually is. Your brain is not fixed. This seems obvious now. But for most of human history, scientists believe that once you hit adulthood, your brain was basically done developing. You got the neural structure you got, and that was it for life. Turns out that's completely bullshit. Your brain is constantly rewiring itself based on what you do, what you think, and what you pay attention to. Every single experience you have, every thought you think, every action you take is literally reshaping the physical structure of your brain. Sorry, I got distracted by a notification on someone that asked me if I had a YouTube channel. I do! I'm talking to you right now. Let me just show you the chat. Kevin Kins, I don't know who this is. Probably someone that maybe a mutual, I think, from the common groups, but he's asking me if I have a YouTube channel. Alright, back to the Back to the story. Neuroplasticity is value neutral. It doesn't care if you're building good habits or bad ones. It doesn't distinguish between productive patterns and destructive ones. Your brain just reinforces whatever you do repeatedly. If you scroll TikTok for 3 hours every night, your brain optimizes for that, builds stronger pathways for distractions and dopamine seeking. If you read for 3 hours every night, your brain optimizes for that, builds stronger pathways for focus and information processing. The mechanism is the same. The brain doesn't judge, it just adapts. And this is why New Year, New Me fails so spectacularly for most people. They are trying to overlay new behavior on top of old neural architecture without understanding that the old pathways are still stronger. It's like trying to redirect the river. You can dig Man, this guy just called me. It's like trying to redirect the river. You can dig a new channel, but if the old channel is deeper and more established, the water's gonna keep flowing that way. The neuroscience of why change is hard. Your current habits, behaviors, and patterns exist because they are neurologically efficient. Your brain has spent years, maybe decades, myelinating those neural pathways. Myelin is this fatty substance that wraps around neural connections and makes signals travel faster. The more you use a pathway, the more myelinated it becomes, the more automatic the behavior. This is why your bad habits feel effortless. They are running on superhighways of myelin. When you try to build a new habit, you are creating a brand new neural pathway from scratch. No myelin, slow signal transmission, requires conscious effort every single time. And your brain hates this. Your brain is an efficiency machine. It's constantly trying to automate as much as possible to save energy. Conscious effort requires a ton of glucose and oxygen. It's metabolically expensive. So your brain is literally fighting you every time. As you try to do something new, because from its perspective, you're wasting precious resources on an unproven pathway when there's a perfectly good myelinated highway right there. This is the internal resistance you feel when you try to change. It's not weakness, never associate it with weakness. It's not a lack of discipline either. It's simply your brain trying to do exactly what it's evolved to do and trying to conserve energy by defaulting to established patterns. Now here where it gets a little tricky. Your brain also predicts the future based on the past. There's this thing called predictive processing, where your brain is constantly generating predictions about what is going to happen next based on what usually happens. If you usually eat like shit, your brain predicts that you're going to eat like shit today too, and then it generates cravings and impulses to make the predictions come true. If you usually procrastinate, your brain predicts that you are going to procrastinate today, and then it makes you feel resistant to starting work. Your brain is essentially running a self-fulfilling prophecy. Your brain is essentially running a self-fulfilling prophecy loop based on your past behavior. Breaking out of this requires understanding that you're not just fighting habits, you're fighting your brain's entire predictive model of who you are. Identity is neurological. You cannot change your destination overnight, but you can change your direction overnight. This is the part most people miss entirely. When you say I am something, you are not just describing yourself, you are reinforcing a neural pattern. I'm not a morning person isn't just a statement. It's a neural pathway that your brain uses to predict and generate behavior. Every time you say it, think it, or act on it, you're strengthening that pathway. Your identity is literally encoded in the structure of your brain as a collection of self-referential neural patterns, and your brain treats your identity as ground truth. It's the foundation of its predictive model. So when you try to do something that contradicts your identity, your brain throws up massive resistance because you are threatening the integrity of its predictive model. If your identity is, I'm not a gym person, and you try to start going to the gym, your brain is going to fight you every day. Not because you can't physically do it, because it contradicts the neural pattern of who your brain thinks you are. This is why identity level change is so much more powerful than behavioral level change. I've wrote about behavioral level change in the past, but I haven't gone too deep into identity level change. Think of it like this. If you are trying to change a behavior while keeping the same identity, you are pushing a boulder uphill forever. You are like Sisyphus. But if you change the identity first, the behavior flows naturally from it. The person who identifies as someone who takes care of their body doesn't need willpower to go to the gym. It's just what they do. It's consistent with their neural model of self. The person who identifies as a learner doesn't need to force themselves to read. It's automatic. It's who they are. When you wake up, you brush your teeth automatically. It doesn't require mental effort and you don't feel resistance because you identify as someone who has clean teeth and good breath. But here's the thing, you can't just decide to have a new identity and expect your brain to accept it. Your brain doesn't believe statements, it believes evidence. If you tell yourself, I'm a disciplined person, while your brain shows zero discipline, your brain dismisses the statement as noise. You trust behavior over belief. So the only way to change identity is through behavioral evidence that accumulates over time until your brain updates its model. You prove the new identity to yourself through repeated action until the new neural pattern is stronger than the old one. This is why the first weeks of any change are absolutely brutal. You are in this awkward phase when your behavior is saying one thing while your identity pattern is still saying another. Your brain is basically in conflict with itself. Old pattern versus new pattern, and the old pattern is way more myelinated. Most people quit during this phase because the cognitive dissonance is uncomfortable as fuck. But if you can push through it, there's a tipping point where the new pattern starts to become self-reinforcing. You have built enough myelin on the new pathway that it starts to compete with the old one. Your predictive model starts to shift. And that's when change stops feeling like forcing yourself and starts feeling like just being yourself. The role of stress and discomfort. Here's something that's gonna sound contradictory. You need stress to rewire your brain. Neuroplasticity doesn't happen in comfort, it happens under challenge. When you're doing something easy and familiar, your brain is in default mode, just running established patterns. But when you're doing something difficult, something that requires real effort, your brain releases neuromodulators like norepinephrine and acetylcholine. These chemicals create a state of heightened alertness and focused attention. They mark whatever's happening right now as important. Pay attention and code this. This is the neurochemical signal that triggers plasticity. Without it, you're not actually going to create change. You're just going through the motions. And this is why people always say to step out of your comfort zone. Your comfort zone is neurologically stagnant. When you're comfortable, your brain isn't releasing the chemicals needed for plasticity. You're not encoding anything new. You're just reinforcing existing patterns. Growth requires putting yourself in situations where you're legitimately challenged, where you're operating at the edge of your current capabilities. If you feel discomfort, it's not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's simply the signal that neuroplasticity is happening. Your brain is being forced to adapt because the current neural configuration isn't sufficient for the task. This is why people who constantly seek comfort never really change. They're avoiding the exact conditions necessary for rewiring. And this is why the most effective way to change is through repeated exposure to challenging situations. Not traumatically challenging, not overwhelming, but challenging enough that your brain has to do work. Athletes call this training at the edge, always pushing slightly beyond your current ability. Same principle applies to any kind of change. You need to be operating in that zone of productive discomfort. If it's too easy, no plasticity. If it's too hard, you shut down. But right at the edge, that's where your brain rewires fastest. Running is one of my favorite ways to go to the edge. When I start to feel tired and tell myself to quit, that's the most important moment because that's where I decide I have to keep going. Alright, I think this is a really long article. I'll continue reading it tomorrow, but I think it's a very good insight into how the brain works, why having change is important, and I think some of the most biggest takeaway is really how to rewire your brain and how to build a good habit system. Because the truth is, if you don't have a good habit system, you don't have a good proper foundation in your knowledge, if you are unable to accept that and understand how this neuroplasticity work, I feel like it's very easy to dismiss it as, oh, I'm not mentally strong enough. But I think now by understanding it, I think it will help a lot of people to know that, hey, actually it's really biology that is fighting you, it's not really you yourself. And now I understand that comfort zone is actually the default, where you don't need that much change. And I feel that for myself, I'm always very comfortable to be in my comfort zone. So now that I understand this, I think that it will be more important for me to actually try to go out of my comfort zone so that I can rewire my brain constantly, to be constantly thinking, to be open to new perspectives. And yes, I think knowing all of this will allow me to be able to build better habits in the future. That's it for 50 minutes today. I'll see you guys soon. Remember to try to do something new every day and push yourself to limits. Build a habit, guys. Let's go. And